real quick before we get Don up here to talk about doubters in the pews. This one is from Thomas Jefferson. Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burned, tortured, fined, and imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch toward uniformity. What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half of the world fools and the other half hypocrites. Now, all right, so Don is going to come up and talk a little bit about doubters in the pews.
This God stuff's pretty important, pretty powerful stuff. You know, every day a lot of us feel a lot of social pressures to conform to the Christian view of the world. You know, the Christians tell us that they believe in the Genesis version of creation. So, being free thinkers, we went and read Genesis. Right there on the very first page, we found there's 2 different versions of creation in Genesis. We asked our Christian friends about that. They just kind of stared blankly. It's right then and there that we realized that they hadn't even read the very first page of this book that supposedly guides their lives. Even as a farm boy with some experience with animals, I had some grave doubts about the story of Noah. I couldn't understand how old Noah was able to drive all those animals from the other side of the earth clear halfway around the world into his ark. You know, after all, I had enough trouble getting the pigs to go in the truck when we wanted to sell them. As a farm boy, I also wondered about what poor old Noah did with all that manure, especially from the great big animals like the elephants and the hippopotamuses. And where did he keep all the bugs? And how did he keep all the birds from flying away? By the way, did you ever try to catch a bird, let alone thousands of species of birds? By then, our Christian friends usually say something like, well, that's all in the Old Testament. So we say something like, you mean the part with the 10 Commandments, right? Blank stares. Okay, the New Testament then. Was Jesus born in Nazareth, as claimed in Mark and Luke, or in Bethlehem, as claimed in Matthew and John? Blank stares. You know, they claim that Jesus was crucified on Friday and arose 3 days later on Sunday. Now let me see. Friday to Saturday, that's 1 day, and Saturday to Sunday, that's 2 days, not 3. Okay. I know that the Jewish tradition counts a day from sundown to sundown. If he was crucified on Thursday morning or Friday morning and then arose on Sunday evening, you get 3 days, but that's not consistent with what the Bible says. Beside that, it was Passover. They would never accrue a crucifixion on a holy day. Blank stares. How can anybody believe this stuff? Well, you know what? As I've visited various churches and talked to a lot of Christians, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the people who call themselves Christians don't believe it. Or at least they have some very serious doubts. Wait a minute. Am I standing up here trying to convince you that there are actually people out there who attend church regularly, who pledge, take their kids to Sunday school, but they have some serious doubts about the existence of God? Well, in a word, yes. Why would people do that? Well, in my view, these people have made what I like to call the great trade-off. Let's talk about that for a minute. Let's see if we can get inside the head of a churchgoer who has doubts about the existence of God and why they do what they do. Suppose you're a guy who was married in your early 20s and you and your wife were both fairly religious. In other words, you'd both been well indoctrinated when you were children. As a young married couple, you weren't regular churchgoers. Oh yeah, you belonged to a church, you pledged, and you occasionally attended church services and sometimes even adult Sunday school. But it was kind of sporadic. Then a big thing happened. Your wife got pregnant and you were going to have a child to raise. During the pregnancy, you and your wife attended childbirth classes at the church. And that's where you both learned the Lamaze method of breathing. Other members of the congregation who were having kids about the same time attended those same classes. And pretty soon, you all became kind of a family with a lot of common interests. You know, there really isn't anything very religious about any of that. As your child grew, the indoctrination from your own childhood told you that it was important to indoctrinate your child. And most of your relatives on both sides of the family thought that was a really good idea too, although they didn't refer to it as indoctrination. As the years go by, you begin to see some serious inconsistencies in your belief system. But you're kind of in denial. You carefully partition off the religious part of your brain from the rest of your brain, and you never let the two parts talk to each other. After all, is it really all that important to you whether or not there really is a God? Or whether the Bible has holes in it you could drive 6 Mack trucks through side by side? You know, your kids are hanging with a bunch of other good kids in a supervised environment, and the church is pretty light on the indoctrination stuff. And there are a lot of great activities for your kids, including summer camps and community projects. Church even has a gym and occasional parties for your kids. Your kids love getting together with their church friends. What's not to like about that? Especially since it's mostly non-religious. Then there's your wife. She really loves singing in the choir. She's also on the hospital visitation team, and that seems to give her a lot of satisfaction. Several times she's been a chaperone on the youth Sunday school trips. That was a lot of fun too. Now, none of that was religious, except maybe for saying grace before meals on the Sunday school trips. Then there are the monthly meetings of the mothers who met in Lamaze class, and now the kids are all about the same age. They're not only compare notes on child-rearing problems, but they also sometimes have a guest speaker. All those things are pretty important to your wife. And you know what? They are largely non-religious. And as for you, well, it is good to get away from the busy day-to-day world and just sit in quiet thought for about an hour each week. Truth is, while sitting quietly, you've had time to reflect on a lot of workplace decisions you're faced with, even solve some of them. And sometimes the minister's voice is almost hypnotic, and you become partially hypnotized, as Darrell Ray, the psychologist, claims. After the service, you come away with a sense of relaxation and fulfillment, that thing some Christians call spirituality. You know, even the rituals are nice, even though they're pretty meaningless to you. Still, there is a certain comfort in the familiarity of them. and the choir and the organ music, they're beautiful too. And occasionally the minister does say something that actually causes you to think in a new way. Then there are the 3-day weekend trips to help build houses for people who lost their homes in a flood or hurricane. You really enjoy the opportunity to get out of the office environment and kind of get your hands dirty for a change. Over time, you've become close friends with a lot of the other members who participate in this project. And of course, the big payoff is the thankful look on the faces of the people that you help. You were never asked to try to convert anybody or anything like that. So you'd have to agree that in general it is pretty non-religious. So you think to yourself, maybe there isn't a God. So what? Almost everybody else you know seems to think there's a God. So maybe there is. Well, everybody except a couple of those intellectuals at work, and they have some really weird liberal ideas about things anyway. Your family is part of a church family, and their church is there to support you. And you know what? That feels pretty good. You choose not to think about it any further. Then one day, you are channel surfing and you run across some atheist guy talking about how there is no God and given 4,000 reasons why religion makes no sense and how religion's even bad and how he doesn't understand how anybody can go to church. Your wife hollers in from the other room to ask you what you're watching, and you say, "Oh, just some jackass atheist braying at the moon." As you continue to channel surf, you think to yourself how that guy really doesn't understand the great trade-off you've made, maybe even unconsciously, and how happy you are with your choice. Now, I think we freethinkers have to ask ourselves, do we really think this guy will be swayed by a "does God exist" debate, even though he may already have some serious doubts? I believe we freethinkers can present him with all the evidence and reason in the world, but it will have very little effect. Remember, he was well indoctrinated as a child, and it's good to be religious in our society. He's already thought about a lot of the debate points, and he's just not ready to abandon all the really good parts of belonging to a church community with all its resources for the sake of what? Some form of academic, intellectual purity? No, siree, not going to happen. As long as the church keeps the supernatural stuff to a low key, he's sticking with the program. From a similar perspective, suppose you're a minister or a priest or even a nun who's now seriously questioning your faith. In fact, at this point, you kind of consider yourself to be a great big fraud, standing up in front of people and telling them lies. But you think to yourself, if you left the ministry, what would you do? You know, you're not exactly trained to be an accountant, and you're pretty old to be offered an entry-level job somewhere with no experience. And if you can just hang on for another 10 years, you'll get a nice pension. And then your doubts won't matter anymore. Then there's the biggie. What would you tell your congregation? After all, they've trusted you and looked up to you as their religious leader for quite a while now. Should you just kind of get up in the pulpit and say, "Well, sorry guys, I was just kind of kidding about all the God stuff"? Nope. You probably will also make the great trade-off. You'll probably rationalize to yourself that after all, you are providing a lot of comfort and hope to people who need it. And you reason that that's a pretty good thing, even if there isn't a God. I think there's little doubt that there are a lot of skeptics and even non-believers in church every Sunday. And some of them are in the pulpit. But that doesn't mean they're just itching to abandon their church. They've made a decision, maybe even unconsciously, to embrace the good parts and ignore as much of the supernatural as possible. So, to us freethinkers, what that means is that we need to keep the perspective of the churchgoers and even some of the ministers in mind when we seek to change religion. And change it we shall. After all, religion has changed more in the last century than in the previous 1,000 years. And the pace is accelerating. The fastest growing religious segment today is none. I believe there's a greater opportunity to make changes in religion now than at any other time in history. But we have to do it with an understanding of where the skeptical Christians are coming from. Because it's the ones with doubts who are our best hope for changing things. Maybe even changing the churches. If you think about it, what we're trying to do here in this organization is emulate the good parts of churches, but without the dogma and supernatural. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get some of the liberal churches to really soft pedal the dogma and the supernatural so much that it's largely non-existent? I've had a chance to visit with some of the more liberal churches the last couple of years. I'm amazed to find that some of them are more liberal, of the more liberal ones, are doing just that on their own in order to come to terms with the modern world. I'll close with a quote from Margaret Mead, the American anthropologist. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has." Thank you.